Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is a Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. It is always wonderful to have CJ here. We're coming to the end of the year. This is the last meetup of CJ this year. He has a great plan next year. So really looking forward to that. So CJ, take it away.
Yes, welcome to Comprehensivist Wednesdays, our ongoing series of weekly events designed to foster the art of comprehensivity, our learning practices for building an ever more extensive, ever more intensive, and ever more integrated understanding of our worlds and its peoples. Buckminster Fuller called it being adequately macro-comprehensive and micro-incisive. Tonight there will be 2 segments with interactive discussion after each. If any of you are new, that means you will be asked during the interactive sessions to contribute questions or thoughts about our topic. This is an interactive forum. Let's get started. Tonight's topic is the ethics of learning from experience. The way in which any tradition of inquiry and action is practiced is beset with issues about the correct or proper way to conduct inquiry and to act within that tradition. During previous events, I asserted that learning from experience is a core epistemic virtue for our comprehensivity, our inclination to understand it all and each other. Tonight, we will explore several issues which may arise as we consider how we should learn from experience. Our comprehensivity is about our aspiration to understand it all and each other. This perspective effectively requires us to begin with an all-encompassing inclusion of all the experience of all humanity. This view is captured in Buckminster Fuller's definition. The universe is the aggregate of all humanity's consciously comprehended and communicated experience. Bucky recommended that we begin all inquiry with this notion of universe so that we don't omit anything from consideration. For comprehensive learning, we begin with universe because it includes all the other others who we aspire to better understand. In comprehensive learning, we must include the experiences of indigenous peoples, historical peoples, extinct peoples, minorities, paupers and billionaires, criminals, terrorists, tyrants, as well as heroes and saints, you and me. All these experiences become valid starting points for our comprehensive exploration. We must also include our experiences with microbes, plants, animals, eclipses, the sun, moon, planets, and other star systems. Comprehensive practice invites us to include everything that anyone has experienced as an event sequence or imagined as a possibility. In short, comprehensive learning is about learning from experience. A major alternative is to begin with some principles that are assumed to be apodictic or necessarily true. Sometimes these are called first principles or axioms or self-evident principles, metaphysical or theological principles, faith-based beliefs, rationality, the principles of critical thinking, and many other formulations. Such assumed to be certain truths are the beginning point for many systems of learning. We might call such systems of inquiry and action apodictic, since they begin with certainty. It might seem that apodictic systems of learning are incompatible with comprehensive learning, because a system with necessarily true starting points is inclined to discount or reject beliefs that are at odds with its first principles. Moreover, apodictic systems may reject alternative starting points. From the comprehensive perspective, which values all experience and all starting points, it might seem arrogant or imperial or even colonial or violent to insist that other beliefs and other starting points are invalid. But if we are serious about understanding it all and each other, we need to examine even those traditions whose first principles put them at odds with both our comprehensive learning and other antithetical systems of learning. For the comprehensive learner, delving into such worlds is par for the course. Comprehensive practitioners are endlessly curious about how other systems of knowing work, even apodictic ones. I think comprehensive practitioners should take a long view with respect to apodictic systems of learning. Someday we might learn of an absolutely correct principle governing our worlds. If it concurred with everyone's experience, we might conclude that it was demonstrably true or apodictical. In fact, for all we know, such principles may already have been identified. So we should be curious and appreciative of apodictic systems of learning, even if our experience with so many of them leaves us a little skeptical about many of their claims. To try to contrast learning from experience and apodictic or self-evident systems of learning further, let's consider Buckminster Fuller's self-discipline for experientially based thinking. He wrote in the book Critical Path in 1981, "My definition of the word believe means to accept an explanation of physical phenomena without any experiential evidence. At the outset of my resolve, not only to do my own thinking, but to keep that thinking concerned only with directly experienced evidence, I," this is Buckminster Fuller, "resolved to abandon completely all that I ever had been taught to believe." That was Buckminster Fuller, 1981, in Critical Path. Bucky's proposed approach rejects the apodictic or necessarily true principles of other systems of learning unless they can be supported by experiential evidence. Bucky suggests their logic is backwards. Instead, we should start with experience and then infer reliable, generalized principles. Apodictic systems start with core principles, which often include some way of interpreting and examining experience. For apodictic systems, experience is a secondary consideration. Bucky's learning and my recommendation for comprehensive learning starts with experience, starts with all humanity's experiences. It is important to realize that Bucky includes the experience of others as acceptable, as he put it, directly experienced evidence. We can see this by integrating into our interpretation of Bucky this excerpt, a short quote from Synergetics. To get to it, the context is Bucky's definition of universe, the aggregate of all humanity's experience. So in Synergetics, Bucky writes, "People say to me, I think you have left something out of your definition of universe. But never will anyone disprove my working hypothesis because it will take experimental proof to satisfy me, and the experiment will always be part of the experience of my definition, ergo included." So Bucky is not stridently rejecting all beliefs. He's just subjecting them to testing against experiential evidence. How do we make sense of his self-discipline to do one's own thinking by abandoning all beliefs? More broadly, how should we start our learning? Should we start with apodictic or necessary truths as our first principles? Or should we start with experience and reject all our received wisdom until we can validate it with trustworthy experience from ourselves and others? On that ambiguous set of questions, Shrikant, I'm thinking if we organize a breakout, I'd like people to grapple with that introduction and see what sense they can make of it, if any.
Wonderful. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the breakout. Shall we do 20 minutes?
Yeah, at least 20 minutes. I think there's enough there that, some people joined late, so you might have to paraphrase some of it.
Sure.
Let's give them enough time to get into it.
Okay, so let's do 23 minutes. Folks, we're starting the breakout rooms now. The rules in the breakout rooms are very simple. Keep on topic, be brief, be courteous. They're going to be facilitated by CJ, Joe, and Maritza. Starting the breakout rooms now. Then in about 23 minutes, you'll come back here automatically to go to the second part of CJ's presentation. Then we will follow it up with questions from you and lightning round of answers to those questions. Starting the breakout rooms now.
Okay, good. You can hear me?
Yes.
I had a little glitch in the breakout. It wouldn't let me unmute, but I fixed it. Okay, so now to more deeply explore the ethics of empiricism. In the first part, we considered Bucky Fuller's self-discipline for learning from experience by rejecting any received wisdom that cannot be supported with experiential evidence. There are other approaches to learning from experience. In an event last January on the inductive attitude, a moral basis for science and comprehensivism, the video's on YouTube if you'd like to look for it, we saw that George Polya also starts his learning from experience. He writes in 1954, "Induction is the endeavor to extract the most correct belief from a given experience and to gather the most appropriate experience in order to establish the correct belief regarding a given question." So far, Polya and Bucky agree. Experience is the central tool for learning. But now I'm going to read a long quote from George Polya that stakes out a far more tolerant position about our beliefs than Bucky. The inductive attitude. In our personal life, we often cling to illusions. That is, we do not dare to examine certain beliefs which could be easily contradicted by experience, because we are afraid of upsetting our emotional balance. And there may be circumstances in which it is not unwise to cling to illusions. But in science, we need a very different attitude, the inductive attitude. This attitude aims at adapting our beliefs to our experience as efficiently as possible. It requires a certain preference for what is matter of fact. It requires a ready assent from observations to generalizations, and a ready descent from the highest generalizations to the most concrete observations. It requires saying maybe and perhaps in 1,000 different shades. It requires many other things, especially the following three. First, we should be ready to revise any one of our beliefs. Second, we should change a belief when there is a compelling reason to change it. And third, we should not change a belief wantonly without some good reason. These points sound pretty trivial, yet one needs rather unusual qualities to live up to them. The first point needs intellectual courage. You need courage to revise your beliefs. Galileo, challenging the prejudice of his contemporaries and the authority of Aristotle, is a great example of intellectual courage. The second point needs intellectual honesty. To stick to my conjecture that has been clearly contradicted by experience just because it is my conjecture would be dishonest. The third point needs wise restraint. To change a belief without serious examination, just for the sake of fashion, for example, would be foolish. Yet we have neither the time nor the strength to examine seriously all our beliefs. Therefore, it is wise to reserve the day's work, our questions, and our active doubts for such beliefs as we can reasonably expect to amend. Do not believe anything, but question only what is worth questioning. Intellectual courage, intellectual honesty, and wise restraint are the moral qualities of the scientist. George Polya, 1954. The big difference between Bucky's self-discipline to do his own thinking and Polya's inductive attitude is the principle of wise restraint. That is the view, as Polya put it, that we have neither time nor the strength to examine seriously all our beliefs. So we should only explore our active doubts for such beliefs as we can reasonably expect to amend, as Polya put it. Polya recommends caution in changing our beliefs, whereas Bucky's self-discipline was to abandon completely all that I had ever been taught to believe. That's a big difference. Our question is, how ought we learn from experience? Should Bucky or Polya be our guide for experiential learning? To gain some perspective on this question, let's consider everyday theory. Everyday theory are the principles that ordinary people like you and me invent to explain our worlds. in comparison to a theory from a scholarly tradition. This subject of everyday theory is discussed in a poignant 6-minute video between Smitha Radhakrishnan and Patricia Hill Collins, which is embedded in my essay referenced in the event description that supplements this topic. Patricia Hill Collins makes the poignant point that the everyday theories of ordinary people may be both not quite true and yet very empowering for living their lives. In seriously considering her point, I came to realize just how violent it is to disabuse someone of their not quite true coping mechanism just because I believe my theory is supported by better evidence or better scholarship, or that it's incontrovertible or apodictic. Focusing on the truth of our beliefs misses the much more important operational view, identifying and appreciating how the value of our beliefs work as tools in our lives, in living our lives, even when they are not quite true. This insight from sociology powerfully reinforces an observation I made after studying advanced introductory classical mechanics on MIT X in 2016. I recognized in that course that so-called inferior theories like Newtonian mechanics are still essential for effective thinking in physics. Universities still teach these allegedly obsolete theories because effective thinking requires both generalized theories that might be true all the time and specialized tools like Newtonian mechanics that only work at relatively slow speeds far away from the speed of light. I mean, God forbid, how often does that happen? In order to understand the world, we need many theories to think it through. And I think Patricia Hill Collins is arguing the same thing, but in the context of sociology. Now, I'd like to try to come to value Bucky's recommendation that we think only with directly experienced evidence, even though Patricia Hill Collins' observation that not quite true beliefs can be empowering, and despite my realization from physics that these obsolete beliefs are still useful. So let's consider Bucky's belief again, and to emphasize it, I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see how this works. Okay, is that working? Okay, I got a thumbs up. So I'll read it. My definition of the word believe means to accept an explanation of physical phenomena without any experiential evidence. At the outset of my resolve, not only to do my own thinking, but to keep that thinking concerned only with directly experienced evidence, I resolved to abandon completely all that I ever had been taught to believe. Bucky is presenting a self-discipline. It is not a manifesto. It is a suggestion to test the beliefs we have been taught with the inventory of experiential evidence we have accumulated. I hear Bucky saying to think about the world more effectively than our received beliefs permit. We need to boldly question those beliefs. Bucky's unique way of seeing the world was probably forged from his willingness to abandon the beliefs he had been taught. If we are to see the world in new ways, we too must be willing to abandon what we have been taught. Bucky is not telling us to disabuse others of their beliefs. To remind us to refrain from zealously imposing Bucky's ideas on others, I'm reminded of his comment in the interview, Only Integrity is Going to Account, from 1983, where he said, "I never try to tell anybody else what to do." Bucky is offering in this quote, he's offering us the service of his self-discipline in the hope that some of us may find it helpful to rethink the world anew with fresh eyes. Maybe you are ready to abandon the beliefs that are blocking you from really doing your own thinking. In that case, Bucky's approach would be valuable. But as George Polya reminds us, changing our beliefs can upset our emotional balance. Maybe you prefer Polya's inductive attitude because it invites us to learn from experience with less upset. Or maybe you're apodictic, that means certain beliefs are so strong that you would not change them no matter how strong the evidence. The inventory of experiences I've presented and that our society offers for addressing learning from experience include contradictory advice about how to learn. From a comprehensive view, we would like to adopt values to guide us in learning from experience, but our guidance is contradictory. So each comprehensive explorer must take on the responsibility to design their own system of values. I'll end with a few questions and then we can move into a Q&A. Let me just share these questions. How do you think you should learn from experience? How should we learn from experience for our comprehensive practice? How might it change? How might our learning from experience might change depending on our life history? Our life history is the timing and events that comprise our lives, such as our age, how many children and grandchildren we have, etc. So Shrikant, let's invite others to share questions and organize them and see what we can do.
Wonderful. CJ, this is an amazing topic. I mean, I think this, and you managed to finish everything at 9:55. So I'm really looking forward to this question and answer. So folks, this is a very deep topic. This goes to the heart of epistemology. You know, what is the relationship between experience and beliefs? And where do beliefs come from? How do you hold them? How do you correct them? How do you think about experience? How do you think about beliefs? So just go ahead, and we're not trying to answer any questions right now. In this domain, I want to come up with as many questions as you can. Don't make any statements. Let's just go with questions, okay? Then I'll organize all the questions, and then we will get to answer them. And let's see how good a job we can do here, okay? Give me just a second here. Hold on. Okay, all right. So first, Laura, what's your question? Just your question, please. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Well, I know this little book that he wrote on problem solving with his four-step problem polio, which is a wonderful book to use to I worked on developing stuff for college based on a program that was designed for high school students. NAI model from Carnegie Mellon, which based strongly on Polya's
Thank you.
method.
Laura, can you put it as a question? We are just trying
Yes,
to
I'm gonna
identify
do that.
key questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to the question. No more background. So saying that things like this are wonderful, but how do you propagate them, to the broader population? I mean, how do you get it to beyond the neighborhoods you're in?
Got it.
Okay, that's what.
Thank you. So how do you propagate these methods to a wider audience? Very good. Next up is going to be Joe, Kevin, and Vanessa. Joe.
So I have one very basic question, and it's just how do you ensure intellectual honesty? What's the process for that? Because often we're lying to ourselves. Another one, and I'm going to kind of take it from somebody in our room, so I'm stealing. If you're starting with experience as a principle, isn't that an apodictic principle, like in its own right? Aren't you making that an absolute when you're trying to avoid absolutes?
Okay, thank you. So 2 questions. One is, what is the process of maintaining intellectual honesty? And second is,
starting with experience, requiring to start with experience, an apodictic principle.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is Kevin, followed by Vanessa and George. Kevin.
Thank you, Suyanka. Should we abandon our own belief from a comprehensive view? This first question. Second one, if so, how can we abandon our own beliefs?
Okay, how do you abandon your own beliefs? Very good. Next up is going to be, let's go with, is it George? George, go ahead. George, what's your question?
Yes, how do you decide based only on experience which experiences are reliable?
Wonderful.
Because experiences contradict each other.
Wonderful. How do you determine reliability of experience, especially when they contradict? Very good. Next up is going to be Vanessa. Vanessa, what's your question?
Well, how do you deal with things that could never have been experienced, like, or for the Big Bang and the acceptance that, okay, dinosaurs must have reptilian type skin. I understand, okay, the experiments are part of the universe, but no one directly experienced them. How are they handled?
Thank you. Excellent question. How do you handle things that you cannot directly experience? Very good. Mike.
The question is it ethical to act contrary to a belief, a personal belief, if it benefits a loved one or if it's for the sake of another?
Okay, ethical to act against. Okay, very good. Next up is going to be, let me see, DLG has a question. DLG, you want to ask the question or do you want me to read it out? Okay, I'm going to go with Maritza, and then DLJ, if you want, you can go ahead and ask the question, and then Alexander. DLJ, go ahead.
I think that while I was typing it, somebody else was already answering it. It's about the direct experience versus so other people's direct experience based on evidence. Do I doubt that? And take that as though it's some authority. In other words, do I have to do every scientific experiment myself?
Let's do one thing. Yeah, your sound is not very good. So let me read out your question. Other people's experienced evidence is not my direct experience. Is Bucky advocating I should trust nothing not personally experienced or merely nothing that is not supported by evidence? Okay. So what is the role of other people's direct experience in cognition? Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Alexander. Maritza.
Where is the space in this experience-based learning for actually holding on to beliefs?
Okay, is there a place in this system for holding on to beliefs? Very good. Okay, Alexander.
In research for truth, the question is why we are so focused on actual experience, which is only 1/3 part of European philosophy created by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And another point we started discussing in the group, there is a huge Indian philosophical system, Jaya, which is pretty different.
Thank you. So the question is, why are we putting so much emphasis on experience when different philosophies have focused on other things? Very good. Okay, so this is a great palette of questions to start out with. Let's see where to begin. What do you think you should?
Ambika has one.
Ambika, what's your question?
Beliefs at some point become false, and how do false beliefs become destructive to communities?
Okay, how do false beliefs become destructive to communities? False beliefs. Okay, Judy, you had a question.
What is the process of deciding when one will engage to learn how to learn?
Okay, how do you engage? Learn how to learn. Okay, learn the process of how to learn. Okay, CJ, you had something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should address the critical ones first. So Alexander, Joe, and George had the, in my view, sort of the critical ones.
Sure. Let's do one thing. There is a couple more people, one more person who has question. Mike, what's your question? Question only, please. Mike S.
Knowledge and wisdom seem to be the drivers, the difference between knowledge and wisdom in this. Polya and Feynman added understanding and insight to that equation. How does that fit?
Wonderful.
Galileo added thought experiments to that equation, many of which were totally fictional. How does that fit in with this?
Wonderful.
If you're trying to solve the differences between wave-particle duality, along quantum loop gravity and supersymmetry, you need to take a bigger extension in that. If you're trying to solve the difference between Keynesian and
Mike, keep it to questions. That's good. Let's do that.
Well, that's the question.
Okay, very good.
Add those things to it in those things where chimeras are important and thought experiments.
Ambika, you had a question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to this previous one, to communities and civilizations. It's such a big, long drift of things from history.
Thank you. All right. Sorry about the interruption, CJ. Please go ahead.
No.
Selection that you had.
We absolutely want to hear everyone's questions. If anyone comes up with any more, we can add to the pile.
If you have, folks, if you have questions, go ahead. Instead of typing exclamation mark, put a question mark, so that we'll be able to distinguish between questions and answers from now on. Go ahead, CJ. Which questions do you want to take first?
I want to try to address some of the critical questions on the thesis. Then I think we can invite others to add their 2 cents.
Sure.
And then if in that time you might organize the rest of the questions, they're all good. Some of them feel to me like they get away from the topic, but they get away from the topic and sort of what's the next step. So at the end, that would be nice, but I would, try to focus on the ones for the topic. Alexander asks, why focus on experience? that gets to a fundamental assumption in my whole approach to comprehensive learning. Buckminster Fuller said in several places, you know, the reason I became successful and people knew about me is because I decided to be a comprehensivist and no one else was at that time. Well, very few others were. And I was inspired by that. And then I took some courses in anthropology and I started to wonder, you know, can we really start with Western philosophy if, you know, we have the Tao Te Ching, if we have the dreaming of the Aborigines? Maritza kindly organized a topic on that. Wouldn't, if we're going to be a comprehensive, try to understand the world and each other, which part of the world should we start with? Maybe we should start with the Australian Aborigines. Maybe Western philosophy shouldn't be first. Maybe we should start with the elder brothers in the Sierra Nevada. Maybe we should start with the Blackfoot. Maybe we should start with the Chinese or Indian. You know, it becomes not clear where to start. And any start that you would propose is then, you know, sort of dismissive of the others. So I said, in order to get comprehensive thinking off the ground, we need to include everyone's experience, everyone's story, everyone's perspective, everyone's belief about how to begin. And many of those beliefs are, like the Western philosophical tradition, apodictic. They start with principles and they say you need to start with first principles. Well, as I've thought about this, maybe you don't need to start with first principles. You start with, I'm curious about everybody. I want to understand everybody on the planet. So I mean, I can start with any of them. Maybe, you know, somebody might start with the Australian Aborigine. Someone else might start with the Blackfoot. Someone else might start with the Chinese. You know, maybe you don't get to Western philosophy for a decade or two. Shouldn't that be a valid approach to comprehensivity? And my assertion is, to be fair, I think you can only do it randomly or through whatever your own personal experience guides you to. And so comprehensive learning has to be, in my view, as a tradition, it has to be inclusive of all experience and all starting points. And as I mentioned in the first segment, of course, we're interested as comprehensive learners in all the others. So we do want to learn all these systems of Western philosophy, of all the other systems. But as a starting point, the only thing I can imagine is experience. Now, Joe asked, and maybe it was also George. George was asking more about the reliability of the experiential evidence. Maybe I should let everyone handle that one. But Joe, what was your second question? Not about the intellectual honesty. Oh, no, here it is. Isn't experience apodictic? That's it. I just couldn't read my notes. Joe asked, he said someone else, and he stole this from someone else, so I don't know who that someone else is, but thank you. Isn't experience apodictic? So as I just explained, we're starting with experience. Is that apodictic? Well, we're starting with that we should consider all experience, but we haven't started with which experience is certain, which experience to believe. In this topic, as I presented it, we eventually came to some contradictory beliefs in following George Polya and Buckminster Fuller's values for learning from experience. So it's like apodictic in the sense that there's a starting point. But I don't think that starting point imposes necessary truth, necessary certainty. So I might start with the Australian Aborigines and learn about the dream time. And then I might move to the Blackfoot and study their philosophy. And I might say, you know, I like the Blackfoot philosophy better than the Aborigine. I'm going to, you know, take that as what I learned from experience. You know, you might not like your starting point. You know, an apodictic system says my starting point is what I believe going forward. If you want to be George Polya-like, you could say, until I find evidence against it. If you want to be Buckminster Fuller-like, you say, well, I was raised in a society that taught me about the dreaming and the song lines. And from this, I'm now questioning that, and I'm going to go study Western philosophy to see if my Aboriginal beliefs can hold up to them. Or maybe the other way. Maybe you're a Western philosopher and you're going to study the dream time and see if it holds up to Western philosophy. You know, I invite everyone to pursue it in their own direction. So that avoids the certainty aspect of apodictic. But I get your point. There is a sense that since you have a starting point, it feels like that's a certainty that you're starting with. But no, each experience that I learn and each belief from whichever culture or tradition I'm studying, I take it on hypothesis. That's a good hypothesis. It's not certain, it's not apodictic, it's hypothesized. And then I search for other hypotheses. And when I have enough hypotheses, I start trying to figure it out based on my own mind, or maybe I try out one or more traditions that I hope will bring light to it. Okay.
All right. Just a second. I think I'm getting an echo from your line.
I'll mute.
So CJ, if you're done, I would like to hear what other people have to say. Is that okay? I will go ahead.
Yes, I agree. Let's let anyone comment on that.
Let me go ahead and organize that so that people can comment on all the questions. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So folks, I want to hear how everybody thinks about the topic. So there is experience and there is beliefs. So first, let me put the questions, because there are many questions about experience. There are many questions about belief. So first, I want to put a general thing, what in your view, in your own way of dealing with experience, in your own way of dealing with beliefs, what do you think is the relationship between experience and beliefs? So just that question, if you would like to answer that, go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll start with Maritza, DLJ, and Jen. Maritza.
My experience with beliefs is grain of salt. I come from a culture that has very strong beliefs. Many of them are in a superstitious nature. And so for me, I have tried often to walk the path of honoring the experience that has allowed me to be forged into the person I am, while at the same time, having skepticism enough to expand and seek greater knowledge and different experiences from those within my culture.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. So folks, the question is, how do you see experience and how do you see beliefs, and what do you see as a relationship between them? How do you think about that? DLJ?
Can I chime in one more? Like the idea of the relationship between them. I will say, Shrikant, that I reject the idea of a apodictic experience, because I don't think we can have anything that is so complete. So what I find to be the relationship between the experience and the belief is that the belief is a stepping stone for us, and it shouldn't be believed and held on to so tightly that there's no room for growth. But I also think that we cannot grow in our values and we can't set principles unless we have something to start with. So we have to hold on to something. And that's where the beliefs come in, because our most primary belief system is that which is given to us. And then we have to look at it, and then we're going to kind of, expand upon it or shrink it or pivot with it. But you need something to start with. So that's how I think that relationship goes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is going to be DLJ, Jing, Vanessa, and Joe. DLJ.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm just about to say the same thing, but in slightly different words. So for me, belief is the baseline for which any new information then gets compared against. Either information could be the same, which is within our comfort zone, or it's different, in which case we have to evaluate it. The experience is the input. So that's the new information coming in, which we can accept or reject. So I'm seeing them as two separate things. Belief is the baseline, experience is the input.
Wonderful. I really like your term input, because there is an output that we have to always put out, and that is your action. You have to be acting in life, and that's also a crucial part of the equation. So experience, belief, and action. Go ahead, DLJ.
Just one addition on that, then the new baseline after you process your experience is an output as well.
Yes, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Cheng, followed by Vanessa. Cheng.
Yeah, I think the belief will define our experience. And on the opposite side, our experience will modify or update our belief.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. It's very much of a OODA loop kind of a process. Next up is going to be Vanessa, followed by Joe, Mike, and Tatiana. Vanessa.
Well, I think it's like maybe a spectrum. Maybe it's the faith or those things, like maybe your self-truth that you hold dear. And then maybe you have beliefs. Then you maybe have the experience, and then the trust is maybe the things that maybe tie them both together, that you can, because sometimes you may have an experience, then you may have the trust, oh, I find that to be true, and realize the next day, oh, it's completely wrong. So maybe faith is kind of the thing that, the glue that holds you together, just like water is essential to life. Other things will keep you alive. So it's a combination of those, but also you should be willing to challenge both of those. Like even if you have a starting point and seeing, oh, was I wrong here? And maybe acknowledge maybe my faith is not put, but I still need to cling to something to get me to the next point.
Thank you. Next up is Joe, Mike, Tatiana, and Jenny. Joe.
Yeah, explaining it like the OODA loop is actually an excellent way of, looking at this, is that your experiences shape your beliefs. And you kind of, that's why it's important in specific instances not to be dogmatic about your beliefs, because if you are, that loop stops and you have a fixed mindset and a fixed viewpoint on the world. So that the critical part is that your belief system is, as you have always said, strong positions lightly held, in order to make sure that the information is getting processed. Otherwise, it's not a loop anymore.
Wonderful. And I think the crucial part of the loop is the action, because it is the action that is going to produce new experience. So whether you got it right or wrong, and that's going to allow you to fix it. Go ahead.
Independent action, that's the most important part. Your independent action, so that your orientation completely is able to shift based on that. That's really critical.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Which Mike?
Mike S.
Mike S.
I am
Okay.
resetting your time. I want to give you
Resetting my time.
Yes. Go ahead.
George brought in two words, apodictic, and he brought in orthogonality. And I'll add one more thing. You got to specify your decision space. So in problems of any complexity, reality is not what you think it is. So our problem is to define all our terms. And then most of what we do is not true, even at the domain we're interested in, but can be useful. Heuristic is another word. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. And I really like your observations about bringing in things like insight, understanding, wisdom, and making all those distinctions. Thank you.
Thank you. That wasn't me. That was Feynman.
Yes, but it was Feynman channeling.
And Polya.
You were channeling Feynman, and he was speaking through you today here. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. Next up is going to be Tatiana, Jenny, and Kevin. Tatiana.
Actually, it's Alex. I'm just using my wife's laptop.
Okay. All right. You see, my experience is all screwed up here. But okay, now it's all fixed. Okay.
I'm not looking like typical Tatiana. Sorry about it.
Yes.
The point is, what I would like again expand our vision to a problem. We're talking about individual things, about my own experience, my own vision, my own insight, and so on. I would like to talk a little bit about ontologies, as we are talking about ontological problem.
No. What we do, sorry, Alexander. Well, Alexander, yeah. Right? So what we do is that we take only one question at a time. So the question on the table right now is what is the relationship between, what do you think is the relationship between experience and belief? You got 1 minute to talk about it.
Okay, it's really depends on your own ontology. If you live in a scientific ontology, experience is everything. If you believe in a quantum mechanic, it depends on the observer, quantum observer who is looking to a quantum system. If you are in a spiritual ontology, the God is the main source of truth. God said, done, that's it. If you have no ontology, you have no truth. You just live in the world.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Jenny, Kevin, and Jeff. Jenny.
I'm indoctrinated into belief systems through family, culture, and society, and hopefully through my own experience and critical thinking, I begin to question those beliefs and begin to form my own and not just take, somebody else's beliefs. I question that, and that's a continuous process.
Wonderful. Great point, Jenny. I mean, the thing is that the amount of things we pick up as children before our reason is fully developed is quite scary. And it's a glory of human beings that we have the capacity of doing that. But we pick up a lot of things very, very early when we do not have the capacity of actually using our reason and figuring things out. Thank you, Jenny. Next up is Kevin, Jeff, Tatiana, and Alexander and Laura. Kevin.
Thank you, Srinka. And I have to value Marissa's point about your own belief or principle. I would suggest maybe we could use the order loop, try improve at least experience other experience, try curious about other beliefs. The curiosity and scientific temper maybe help us to learn from others for your own benefit, not just criticize for put other belief or other experience down. They get own another, you feel better about yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Jeff, Alexander, and Laura. Jeff.
So I would say that one of the very best things about CJ, the attempt to be comprehensivist, is that when it comes to beliefs and experiences, really the most important thing is what we think we have learned from those experiences, the conclusions that we draw from those experiences. And I think that the operating mode of a comprehensivist orientation is to treat all conclusions as tentative, because the survey set is too small. And therefore, that is the epistemological point, is that in order to get better at being able to assert anything, we need a bigger survey. And the bigger survey is found at the heart of an attempt to be comprehensivist.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Next up, I mean, for me, the best thing that summarizes it is a Sapolsky statement of, strong beliefs weakly held. So strong beliefs is important because that's going to drive your action. And weakly held means you have the intellectual honesty and curiosity and openness to be corrected. And both those are critical. Next up is going to be Alexander, Laura, and Marisa. Alexander.
What is a triangle in experience, beliefs, and group beliefs? Because human beings are pretty social creatures. And it was many scientific experiments. For example, if one individual see a green something, but the group says it's blue, the person in a couple minutes begin believe and see blue. And since we are moving to a kind of Orwellian world with such a high pressure of government, society, social media, and so on, actually it's more important not actual experience or personal belief, but the group belief. What group belief, it's a truth.
Thank you. Next up is Laura, followed by Maritza. Laura.
I'm sort of the belief and the experience. I think that I may hold a belief, but I really have to see how a bit more, but I really need the experimental data kind of to prove it and so forth. So I fall into that category.
Thank you. And I really like, I think experiment is a very powerful word here, where you're saying, okay, you're doing the action and you're saying, okay, what's the feedback? Is it what I expected, or is it something else? Next up is Maritza.
Listening to a bunch of the answers here has me thinking about the fact that in our striving to be comprehensivists, it is the very fact of acknowledging that there exists such a wide variety of beliefs and not discrediting them, and perhaps even seeking to learn about each one of them. That's maybe the best, that's like the first step towards comprehensivism. Like, because to state whether or not we're going to reject our belief or belief system, I think that's almost less important, because you can hold on to or reject your belief, but if you stay in closed position, your efforts towards comprehensivism are going to be very ineffective. So if we acknowledge that everyone we meet or don't meet has their own belief system, and we move forward with respect of that fact, I think that we put ourselves in a really good position then to grow using the experiences of others, because by the time we get to know a little bit about those belief systems, we're not just learning about their belief system, we're learning about the experiences inherent in that belief system, because I don't think that we can have beliefs without any experience. It may not be our direct, but again, if we remember that we sit on the shoulders of our ancestors, their experience is what now we are calling belief. And if that's true for CJ or Judy or David, if that's true for all these disparate people, as we acknowledge and inquire about those, we're actually accumulating various different experiences for us to mold and shape as our experience And that's what I'm hearing and getting out of this.
Oh, that was fantastic, Marisa. I mean, I'll put it another way. I think confirmation bias is a very deep idea here, because what it does is that it creates this closed loop between beliefs and experience. You're going to experience only the things based on your beliefs, and you're just stuck there. You think that you're open to experience, but no, you are actually not. And the simplest way of breaking the confirmation bias is to be open to other people and to other points of view, and listening to all of that. All right, folks, so there is a bunch of questions now on, go ahead, CJ.
Khan, I wanted to jump in on Maritza, and I really valued Jeff's comment and your comment about Sapolsky. But I didn't hear anyone repeat what I mentioned in the second segment about Patricia Hill Collins's idea that the not quite true beliefs that many of us form to live our lives, this so-called everyday theory is the term in sociology, they have great power in helping us cope. And so it's not a matter of whether, another way to think about it is it's not only whether the belief is true or has better evidence or whatnot, that we get into these scientific frames and evaluate, but it's very important to understand how does that belief shape that culture, that tradition, that individual, and how does it form their coping mechanism? And I really would like to put out that comprehensive learning is not just an assessment of which beliefs have better experiential evidence, which Bucky's statement sometimes suggests, but also what can we learn about the other? How does that belief fit that we think is not true, that we might reject for ourselves? But to understand the other, we really need to understand how that belief fits into their life and shapes them and contributes to how they see the world. And I'm submitting that comprehensive learning is not just about learning the wisdom from this culture and that culture and then putting it together in a cauldron so that we come up with the greatest wisdom ever, but also that we understand each other. We understand the power and magic, and also the coping mechanisms and the ways we live the lives. And my physics example gets
CJ, can I interject on that one?
Yeah.
I mean, the way I see it, I mean, there are many people who have talked about this, about it's bringing in the entire context, the living context, which is the foundation for the beliefs and which is being supported by the beliefs. So you're trying to take in the context, entire historical context of the idea, entire lives of people, their emotions, their goals, their social relationships, because beliefs are ways in which they are, that's the thing inside here, which is driving those things which are outside and which is between people and the physical reality. So understanding the concepts, understanding the context behind the beliefs, behind the concepts is what, I mean, this is what, Walter Ong, for him, this is the big thing that many times people kind of pluck the words out from a culture and play around with the words, but they are missing the entire context of it. Go ahead, sir.
Right. And the other point which I mentioned was based on physics, that even inferior theories, even theories that we now, like a lot of authors just reject Newtonian mechanics as this obsolete theory. It doesn't work at the speed of light, so it's not generalized enough. Only the most generalized principles count as eternal truths. And so Newtonian mechanics, it doesn't work at the speed of light, so we reject it. But when you study physics at MIT, and it shocked me because I had just been reading some of these authors, and I'm like, why are they teaching me Newtonian mechanics? And the reason is because to be a good physicist, you need multiple models. And the model of thinking about, and many physics questions aren't at the speed of light. In fact, most of our everyday life doesn't occur at the speed of light. So Newtonian mechanics actually, inferior theories have a power to them that they're even studied at the highest institutions of learning as the first thing you learn before you get to the true theory. and this blew my mind for a while. Why would we study inferior theories? But the truth is, in order to understand the world, we need multiple theories, multiple hypotheses, multiple perspectives, and those inferior, so-called obsolete theories are used by professionals to better understand things. So this whole notion of truth and generalization and whatnot that tries to really do violence to the context and to the need for understanding the richness and nuance of the questions is, I think, a problem. And it's one of the insights I think comes from comprehensive exploration.
Thank you, CJ. So folks, let's go to the next set of questions that were posed, and they were about experience. So people were asking, how do you know that experience is reliable? What do you do when some of the experience contradicts with other experience? How do you handle that? What is the difference between direct experience, things that can be experienced directly, and many things that cannot be experienced directly? How do you deal with the things that cannot be experienced directly, like things which are further away in space or time? What is the relationship between your own experience and the experience of others? So if you have comments about these issues of experience, either reliability, direct and indirect, or your experience versus other people's experience, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. So just this question, okay? Let's start with Alexander.
My connection, there is one thing which is a line between experience and your understanding, and especially if you understand something and trying to say about it to another person. This thing is called language. There are many languages, some primitive languages like Tasmanian or some aborigines in Australia. There are very sophisticated languages. Also, with regular language, you can explain pretty simple things you can see or feel. If you need to talk about some really specific thing, you have to use a language of mathematics. Math is a pure language to talk about some sophisticated things.
Thank you.
And,
thank you. Your point is that there is that language is involved in how you process experience. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Also, there are a lot of graphic languages. When, for example, social pictograms.
Okay.
You can talk about it for hours, but with social pictograms, you can explain very sophisticated things from your experience in a minute.
Thank you, Alexander. Next up, so the folks, the question is about experience. How do you evaluate reliability of experience? What's the relationship between your own experience and that of others? And what is the difference between things about which you have direct experience and things about which you have indirect experience? Next up is going to be Joe and Vanessa. Joe.
Yeah, so I'll just take the one with, how do you handle experience or incorporate experiences? I do believe you have to have a set of principles. and the way that you just have to keep testing those principles with your experiences. It's as simple as that, as a way of incorporating new experiences. As far as maybe let me come back to the second question, which is essentially how to deal with the unknown, because that's a little bit more complex.
Sure. Thank you. Next up is going to be Vanessa, followed by Maritza. Vanessa.
Well, this kind of had to do with the contradictory experiences. I'd like to think too, respect, and there are no absolutes, where you may see someone that's trying to find medical advice, but maybe focuses more on the prayer and the spiritual or just meditation, but doesn't have the thing for the medication. And for some miraculous reason, they survived the illness where someone did everything to a T. The fluke thing, it's like you're realizing, there's no one way, and try to respect and realize the ideal way may actually be the wrong way. Like I said, depending on the individual.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Maritza.
What comes to mind for me is that I first think that we do have to identify different types of experiences. I find that some are going to be subjective, maybe most. And what the first thing that comes to mind is that we experience experiences differently, even if they appear to be the same experience. And I think that that's a battle that we would all struggle with. So I have put out there before, if there are two sets of teenagers who are about to go to prom and they get stood up by their prom date, if one teenager has known the loss of a loved one, she will be upset, but she will move on. If the other teenager has never experienced loss of any kind, she will be devastated. She doesn't have the emotional muscle or the experience muscle developed in the same manner that the other teenager has the experience muscle developed. So she is going to experience it differently and in a different way than the other teenager. And I think about that example when I try to answer this question, because my brain keeps going like this because I don't have a clear answer for you. But I feel that perhaps it's a matter of taking the time to remember that everyone will not experience things as you do. So if we throw away the very popular statement of do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, and instead we seek greater clarity, or maybe clarity is the wrong word, and maybe it's just so simple as empathy. If we view a situation with the possibility that even a perceived shared experience is not the same, I think we're in again, it's that position open concept. If you're willing to have something that you find to be a truth or an experience or a belief, if you're willing to have that shaken, you set yourself in a better position to learn from it. I don't know if this is making sense. Sorry,
No, this is excellent point. I mean, that is obvious. Like whenever you have an experience, especially a intense experience, and there are multiple people involved, if you simply try to listen to the other people's description of that experience, you would be very surprised. I'm always surprised of saying, because we are complex beings, and experience is not just a sensory thing. It is how your brain is processing all of that based on your values, your knowledge, your culture, your habits, and it's a kind of taking in all of that. And that's what you're getting. When you actually listen to the experience of other people, it is closely connected to their beliefs, and it is closely connected to their life experience, and you're getting all of that. So that's why I think that the point that you're making is absolutely true. Next up is going to be Jeng, Mike, and CJ. Jeng.
Yeah, I think the experience is not objective at all. It's totally subjective. So I did landmark training a couple of years ago. And one thing I found quite interesting is how we create the past, recreate the past experience. So we can create the new experience, which is interesting. You know, it's easy, but how you recreate your past experience. So basically the idea is how you go back to the past and you change your different viewpoint, because our experience, like we see through our lenses or filter. So when you go back to your past, you look at exactly the same thing, but use your new perspective, then it's become totally new experience. So I found that's quite interesting, and that's how they heal people's trauma or whatever. And I think when you have conflict experience, like your experience conflict from your viewpoint or your belief, that's actually exciting point for you to grow. I think that people always have, that's why I have challenges with, I'm not religious, sometimes I have challenges with very religious people, because I feel they are living in this safe bubble. They don't want to see anything conflict. So they are not open to all possibilities. I think conflict experience where we grow, expand our view of the world, just like the ant seeing two-dimensional, and they cannot understand three-dimensional. And they all conflict maybe in the two-dimensional world. But when you go to a three-dimensional world, it's not conflict at all. So you just need to step to a higher level, then everything work together.
Wonderful. Spoken like a true architect. Next up is Mike. Mike A, followed by CJ.
I have found that some of my indirect experience is as powerful as things I've lived through myself, but a couple of variables have to be in place for that to work. One, I have to trust the person. So they become credible in my mind and reliable. And most importantly, they have to be storytellers. And if they tell the story and they're genuine about that, for me, that invokes emotion. And emotion, and I've mentioned this in the past, is the glue, and it sticks. So if those three things are in place, if I trust the person, if I find them to be reliable, and they are a true, genuine storyteller, and it can invoke emotion, then to me, it's an artificial experience that it goes hand in hand with my own personal experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Jing. Really great observations. Next up is going to be CJ, Alexandra, and Jenny. CJ.
Yeah. I wanted to bring in a Leonard Mladenov quote from the 2008 book, The Drunkard's Walk. He wrote, "Human perception is not a direct consequence of reality, but rather an act of imagination. Perception requires imagination because the data people encounter in their lives are never complete and always equivocal." To me, that means that experience is an act of imagination. It's a construction. It's the story we build, which can be parsed and interpreted in many ways. The principles we use are tools for how to parse, how to ask questions that help us interpret experience, generally according to a tradition. But for comprehensive learning, we're trying to get multiple perspectives from multiple traditions, including indigenous belief, minority beliefs, not to be more inclusive so that we can see things from more perspectives. So principles and values are, like, in my view, tools that help us assess things. And with principles, I'd almost prefer to call them hypotheses. And beliefs also, I would tend to use the word hypothesis to evoke a more tentative, a more testing orientation, a more exploratory attitude. But it gets complicated. And as I tried to express in the presentation, you know, we might come across some certain principle. Someone might guess a principle that's really, really true across the board. And you know, we'd love to find one. I mean, I don't know if maybe someone has one. You know, so we shouldn't reject someone. Some people can think more deeply by building on certainty. So you have some intuitions in your life. You know, maybe you're 20, maybe you're 50, and you build a scientific system, a philosophical system, a sociological system, a social work system, you know, whatever you're building, whatever your interests are, you're going to build that system almost certainly with some principles that instead of calling them hypotheses, you're going to set them in stone. And you're going to operate on that assumption in order to build your program, in order to develop your theory, in order to build your business. And I, you know, from a comprehensive view, we would say, well, shouldn't you be more hypothetical about that? Well, yes, of course you should, because in order to intercommunicate with each other, in order to learn from each other, we need to drop our certainties and explore. But in order to build a business, in order to write your grand thesis, in order to develop some tool, you need to go with your gut, find your principles that you think really matter, and build some apodictic system that maybe when you're 70 or 80, you look back on and you say, well, I've learned that that system created these insights, which nobody ever had before. And so I'm glad I built it. But now that I've built it, I see that, yeah, there are other perspectives, and I didn't build the replacement for all other systems. I built another tool. Each tool we build probably has some certain principles. So I think we need to go back and forth between a level of building tools where we make assumptions and build something, and this more comprehensive view where we're trying to understand it all, where those are looked at as interesting hypotheses we can learn from, but we don't want to do violence to people that don't believe them. So that's the best I can do right now.
Wonderful. I like there are some metaphors that people have of scouting versus soldiering, for example. So there is a, you know, comprehensivism involves a lot of scouting. You're going and looking at many different things, and you're trying to put things together. The soldier mindset is to say, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And how do I need to do that? You need very specific ideas of what you need to do. So there is kind of this back and forth tension between inducing things and then applying things. So there is a very interesting play that happens between both of those things, and both of those things are crucial. So very much excellent. Then next up is going to be Alexander, followed by Jenny, and then we're going to go to the next question. So let's try to keep it brief so we can go to the next question. Alexander.
Yeah. From the scientific point, there is a law of Shannon, Wiener, and Ashby, which says in order to understand observing event or object, the observer have to be much more complicated, complex and powerful mind than complexity of observing event or object. If mind is sophisticated enough, the person, the observer, will be able to understand what he's observing. If not, he can't believe. And it's the reason.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Beautifully and concisely put. Next up is Jenny.
I'm going to give you a very brief real life example. I grew up in a Greek Cypriot family. And, you know, obviously I grew up here. I was born in the States. And my second trip to Cyprus to see relatives, we were all sitting around outside and they made a comment, oh, you know, Jenny got fat. Look at her calves. They're fatter now. And at first I was kind of horrified. I didn't say anything. And then I realized something. I was in a different culture with different cultural norms. And and also in America, we might think that, but we would never say it. We would say it behind somebody's back. They're just more direct. And it was just an interesting experience that it wasn't mine was better, there was worse. It was just different. And having that experience, if I didn't have it, it wouldn't have given me the awareness of the culture that I grew up in, which is in America.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Next up, I'm going to take the question that Joe asked about intellectual honesty. And then finally, I'm going to ask an open-ended question. What do you think are virtues, intellectual virtues? Like intellectual honesty to me is a crucial virtue. So I'm going to let's first talk about intellectual honesty. What do you think is the role of intellectual honesty in learning, in handling your beliefs, handling your experience? Any thoughts about intellectual honesty? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to say something. Jenny, go ahead.
No, I just had a question. What do you define intellectual honesty to be?
Okay, excellent. So let's put that as a question as well.
Okay.
You can go ahead and say what intellectual honesty is, and then you can talk about that. So let's start with Joe, because he posed the question. Joe, go ahead.
I mean, I really liked the framework that CJ had laid out. I thought that was an excellent framework. The idea of courage, honesty, and wise restraint, I think is an excellent model for what we're discussing here. I think courage is actually one of the most important things, is because what happens is you have to be willing to challenge your belief system and challenge your understanding of the world. So I think that is the most important part when we were talking about intellectual honesty. I think the most difficult part is being honest with oneself in this process. That's really challenging. Sometimes we tell ourselves things that just simply aren't true. And I can't necessarily say that there's a very good filter for that yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we all have that problem. Yeah, I think courage is actually the most critical part, because the bottom line is to take on the unknown and to challenge your belief systems. I think that's the most important thing.
Wonderful. So I like the way in which you answered the question. So we can make that standard. So you can talk about intellectual honesty, and you can add what other virtues, intellectual virtues, you prize, what you think are important to you. We're going to go with Jeng, Maritza, Vanessa, Mike, and then Alexander. Jeng.
Yeah, I actually quite agree with what Joe mentioned about be honest, intellectual honesty. The most important thing is be honest to ourselves. I actually read somewhere the badass boss, the writer, actually mentioned something I found quite interesting. We always want to be right. That seems the most important thing. People usually quarrel, fight between each other because they want to prove they're right. And they mentioned actually the reason is there's deeper psychological reason behind that. Because if we admit we're wrong, then that means all our map is wrong. Basically, our whole understanding of the reality is wrong. Then that put us in a very deep danger. So that's the reason we were very angry when somebody say we are wrong, because that means we are not safe, because we whole understanding of the world is wrong. That's why people instead of like realize that and adjust their map, they become very angry and defend their map. So I think honest to yourself is most critical. Be brave, facing the reality.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Next up is Maritza, followed by Vanessa. Maritza.
I think if we're talking about intellectual honesty, it's striving towards objectivity. So the subjective is kind of, our day-to-day. We are at our very core emotional animals. But if we're looking at something from an intellectual perspective, we should seek for objectivity. And I think that's the key towards intellectual honesty, because if we are striving for objectivity, we would be less inclined to ignore evidence to the contrary of something we're holding tightly. And I think that it's a must to try to separate the subjective from the objective in a realm of intellect. I like the way that Polya tells us, he says about intellectual honesty, it's that we should change a belief when there's compelling reason to do so. And I really like the emphasis on compelling, in so much as it's kind of, we cannot put our head in the sand if we see that there's something shining a spotlight on an error. And it's the idea of, how we say it only requires one fail to disprove a hypothesis. And you can't, if you did a sample test 1,000 times and it passed beautifully, and then you do it 1,001 and it doesn't, well, it failed. There is no, but 1,000 times it was good, so I'm going to say it's good. And I think we allow our emotional side to get into the mix, and in holding more closely the subjective, we now lose sight of the fact that we're being a little dishonest on the intellectual side. And I think that's the opposite of, what we're striving for, where we think of intellectual honesty. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. So Vanessa, what do you think of intellectual honesty, and what intellectual virtues do you prize?
Okay, I think the intellectual honesty had to do with giving up something you may hold dear if you're giving proof enough to show, okay, that you really isn't valid anymore. But maybe a virtue I kind of have just about life in general is, except I don't want to use the word factor, but there's a good chance that at least some of what you believe or hold to be true is probably wrong, whether you don't have the information yet. And I kind of think you learn maybe more by willing to take those chances. If you ever took dance lessons, how many times did you fall over and stumble and get dizzy till you realize, a focal point, and you get that focal point, and it greatly improves your how you can dance and the moves you can do, and it expands maybe the skills you can do, the skill set. Try pirouetting and doing those other things. If you get dizzy after going around only a half time because you're going so fast, you don't know what a focal point is. So until you stumble and realize, there is a reason there's a focal point, it gets my balance back and I can keep spinning 20 more times.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Mike A.
I think intellectual integrity is another way to put it. And if we're comprehensivist or we think polymathically, I always say that I'm a student here. You have to put yourself out there. And when you are having a conversation with someone who clearly has more expertise than you do, I'm looking around at all the faces here, people that know a lot about a particular subject. And you have to be able to give that information to me as the student here in the conversation in a non-condescending way. And to me, that's what intellectual integrity is. And then it keeps us on the path without kind of pushing us away. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you. Alexander, what intellectual virtues do you prize?
I prize intellectual virtue of purely independent intellectuals, like public intellectuals or small research group, independent research group, because there is a two huge factor which influence mainstream general intellectuals. first, the way how we earn money for living. As a corporation, government pay them money, and it's a huge influential factor. And another thing, it's global trends. For example, 60 years ago, it was a global trend to global freezing. And the whole humanity was preparing to a global freeze. And only people like Forrester was talking, oh no, it's a global warming coming out. But are you crazy? It's global warming. And it was not easy.
Okay, thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Jenny and Ambika. Joe.
Yeah, one thing I do think is important is to consider the fact that, and this is where it becomes lying to ourselves, becomes problematic, is the idea of that the data doesn't always tell the story. And I think that this is where that's a really important point when it comes to intellectual honesty. You start to consider things that we start to say, well, the data doesn't lie, or everybody thinks statistics lies, but that the information in its rawest form doesn't lie. And I think that avoiding that trap is kind of critical when you're determining your intellectual, or when you're being honest about something. How do you incorporate experience, as we're talking about it, with data? And I think that's really kind of a tricky question to answer, but I think it's an important one.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Jenny.
Always recognizing I am always biased. I will always be biased, just recognition of that. And additionally, being aware that there's stuff I don't know. And furthermore, there's stuff that I'm not aware that I don't know. So keeping those things close to me are helpful, or at least trying to keep those things close to me.
Wonderful, thank you. Ambika, what intellectual virtues do you prize?
This has been a very interesting discussion, and what I'm seeing is shades of mirrors facing each other and facing outward. And what seems to come together for me is that ultimately it all comes down to your one self and what your beliefs are and perceptions are and precepts are, and what you are willing to let go of and understand in order to get back to that wholeness, which is yourself. So that is what I do prize, because we often fall out of integrity with ourselves until we learn the lesson. And why did I do that? It's a constant to and fro, and beliefs can become false. When they become false, they become coded into ideology, which is so destructive. But you think you have to follow that because it's what has given you meaning, but it is false meaning. And that is when we are so separate from ourselves. And we see this happening around. Now, the other thing that, Maritza spoke very eloquently about connecting with ancestors. And what comes up for me is we are looking at ancient wisdom, but we are also looking at our ancestors didn't have a very great time. We have been in broken times. So today we are in this place where we are really needing to build up who we are as a people, as individuals, as a civilization, with all of these blends. And so that honesty is so required today. Who am I? Where am I going? How do I see you? How do I wish to be seen and known? So it comes back to love of a different kind, self-love, moving. And I don't mean egoistic self-love, but self-awareness as self-love, from which everything else must arise. This is what it seems
to me. Thank you, Ambika. Next up is Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I just now I think one of good points about this. When we made a choice or made a conclusion, we are biased. So most time we are with bias. So what virtue I believe we should keep is like a weak problem. You find the solution is a weak solution. You build one solution, other question come up. That's the way. But we open it. We try keep going. We accept that. If you see, okay, that's final answer. That's perfect. We are done. We close our mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. CJ.
Yeah, I want to broaden it a little bit to what tradition or traditions do we want to take our guidance from? Or are we as individuals going to go, you know, we can selectively choose a handful. You can't study all the traditions. No one has enough time to do enough field research, pull in enough traditions. So each of us, unfortunately, has to, you know, pick maybe 5 or 10 or 20 traditions, you know, to learn something about. And the tradition that you choose to start from, or the set of traditions, or the invitation of a comprehensive approach, is to try to expand that beyond what you might be inclined to start with yesterday, and, you know, include a few more, and try to seek out a tradition that might be antithetical to some of the ones you thought about, to try to get some additional perspective. And, you know, each tradition has its own guidance on the proper way to conduct inquiry, the proper way to act. And those questions and those guidance for actions will articulate the process. So I don't know whether intellectual honesty implied, well, Mike used the word integrity. I like the word integrity because it talks about building the connections of the pieces, whatever they are. Maritza talked about 1,000 experiments and the 1,001st went wrong. If I did 1,000 experiments and the 1,001st went wrong, I would wonder what happened on the 1,001st time. And most of the time in science, the history of science as I've studied it, when we discover a principle like Newtonian mechanics that, oh my God, we finally pushed it to the limits and now it fails, we don't throw it out as, you know, to be intellectually honest, we're going to have to get rid of Newtonian mechanics. Instead, we still teach it to freshmen with the view that, well, it works in most cases. So just because it failed in the 1,001st doesn't mean we throw it out. We identify where are the cases where this theory is strong, and we use it there. And now, oh my goodness, we've discovered a limitation. That's wonderful. It doesn't mean we throw out the old. It means we refine our understanding by understanding the nuances of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. And I rather think it's a radical idea, but I almost believe that every tradition that's ever been invented by an individual, from caveman through Hitler to the modern world, has some value. It's just, you know, there's some aspect of it that's, you know, ugly too. And we might not, that's my invitation, that any imaginative system probably has some value and some deficiency, some ugliness, some pain. And so that leads me to be cautious. When I've got a good system, I worry about where's the pain? What's the blindness that's going to hurt us? Even though it seems like a very, very good system. Shouldn't we just impose it by fiat on everyone? Why not? It's true. Well, history shows that they all seem to have some blind spot and some ugliness. And when we indiscriminately throw it out there, the ugliness tends to come to the fore. Maybe what we need to do is appreciate that even ugly systems have some drive and value, and understanding how that works will teach us something about the human condition. I'm not sure.
All right, I want to follow up on that just by having people talk about very briefly about the question that CJ started with. What traditions will you take in and why? So just go ahead and just try to be brief. Name a tradition. It could be a field, it could be anything. It could be a person, it could be a culture, it could be a language, anything. What would you like to take in over the next 5 years? What tradition would you like to take in and why? You get to name only one. So just name one tradition that you would like to take in, that you're not like to take in, but that you will be taking in. And why? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Joe.
Okay, so I'm gonna just go to my default and say Stoicism.
You have already taken that in, Joe.
I know, but there's a reason why. I would say.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. It's your tradition. Please go ahead. Sorry about the interruption.
But no, because of what I think the reason why is it's flexible, one, and it also gets to the heart of everything that we're talking about here today. We're talking about the idea of courage, honesty, wisdom. These are principles that we can apply, like the cardinal virtues, these are principles that we can apply to our learning process. And then this whole idea of what wise action actually is, and it's a virtue ethic that has this flexibility. Wonderful. So I think that's the most important part. I think it can permeate, and the foundations of it is that it has a physics, it has an ethics.
Let's keep it short so that we can get as many ideas from as many, because we want to get more traditions in.
Okay.
Next up, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to share a tradition that you're planning to take in over the next 5 years. More different from what you have already, which is already a part of you, okay? More different, the better, okay? Jenny followed by Jen. Jenny.
Oh, it's not more different, but I want to hone it. And I don't know if it counts as a tradition, critical thinking, because that's, it's how I approach, whether it's data, information, philosophies, philosophers, religions, not religions. And I want to hone that. And, you don't use it 100% of the time, but you use it, in important data and information and experiences where you need to make a decision, which does affect your beliefs and your decision making. So honing my critical thinking skills.
Wonderful. And Jenny, you're right. You're welcome to talk about things that you already have, but anything that you are determined to put in significant amount of effort, honing or building on or taking it. Next up, and please go ahead and volunteer. And next up is going to be Jen.
Yeah, actually my old is Plato. I really, somehow when I was in China, I just really believe in this ultimate truth. There's the ultimate truth behind everything. But once I come to America, actually now more interested in Dao De Jing, ironically. So I think Dao De Jing is something I'm actually want to study more, because it's more like the reality is it's not black and white. It's more like in between. So it's more like sophisticated way of looking at things. So you can see the contradict actually can be harmonized together. So I'm more interested in studying Dao De Jing and also the Indian culture, yoga.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Anybody else? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share. So for me, it is no. Let's go with Vanessa first. Vanessa, what tradition are you planning to take in over the next 5 years?
I don't know if there's a name to it per se, but maybe more observation and reflecting upon it and trying to go into the uncomfortable areas that may be either scared or repulsed, and maybe taking someone with me for something. Okay, I just don't want to go something I'm not equipped to do. You know, maybe know my limits, but be willing to push them to some extent.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Kevin.
Yeah, for me, it's a traditional used to be, I didn't think about a lot about the Dao De Jing. It's, however, for myself, I would say try to open the mind to learn from others, not deny culture, not value the cancel culture, not judge others. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Maritza.
I am increasingly interested in taking in more on the ancient civilizations of indigenous people, specifically in Africa, and how the filter down effect goes for our, I guess, our genetic makeup, as it were. That's what I'll be working on.
Wonderful. So for me, it is the scribal age. This is the time after the invention of writing, before printing. And to me, the high point of that is Aquinas as being the best example. So I want to take in Aquinas and I'm trying to learn how the scribal mind worked, of this kind of going back and forth between writing and speaking and writing. And that's what I'm going to be working on. Next up is going to be, let's see, CJ, what are you going to be working on, CJ? Oh, wait a minute. Well, let's go to Judy first, and then we'll come to you. Judy.
I'm going to learn more about what motivates people to be curious, to learn how to learn. Because we all talk about learning how to learn, but what makes somebody be curious to embark on that journey?
Judy, just come to this meetup and ask people. There's a whole collection of curious people who will actually tell you.
That's a great group. It's a wonderful group. It's going to teach me everything about motivation of learning to learn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. Next up is CJ.
Well, the next few years is trying to envision comprehensive exploration. But I envision comprehensive exploration as part of Buckminster Fuller's synergetics. And so I'd like to eventually get to comprehensive thinking, what Buckminster Fuller calls comprehensive anticipatory design science, which, the design way is effectively, in my view, close enough approximation to Bucky's comprehensive anticipatory design science, and then how that fits in with Bucky's vision of synergetics, which I'm both critical of and find incisive in ways that no other system I've seen is. But that's a life plan.
Wonderful. Let's see. Alexander, what about you? In the next 5 years, what one tradition will you be taking in?
I would adopt tradition by Ivan Yefremov, which is based on love and curiosity. As now, unfortunately, we live in an age of fear of famine, fear of war, fear of bad people, fear of demons. It's a good time to move on to love and curiosity.
Wonderful. What was the name of the person you said?
Ivan Yefremov.
Okay,
He's a paleontologist, geologist, and
can you go ahead and put it on the chat? Put it in the chat. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, you found another tradition. Go ahead.
Just like that. It's amazing. No, if I had to pick one thing, it would have to be something with Marshall McLuhan.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I'm really interested in as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so folks, I want to tell you next Wednesday is the time where we are going to go ahead and you can ask any question about comprehensivism. Okay, it's basically you can pull up anything that we have done on comprehensivism, or more importantly, your own quest of comprehensivism. Ask the most fundamental questions, and we are going to do the whole meetup as a series of lightning rounds. Okay, so it's going to be just question after question after question. We will do one round of questions, organize them. Once that is done, we will do one more round and one more round, hopefully 3 different rounds. At each level, we will try to go deeper into questions that are, answers that are coming up and questions that are generated by that. So that's the plan next week. So CJ, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I was just copying Alexander's reference. My closing thoughts are a reflection on the ethics of comprehensive practice. Ethics, it seems to me, is the system of values and principles about proper behavior a community develops to regulate its practice. As we try to imagine values to guide the proper conduct of comprehensive inquiry and action, we are effectively designing the ethics for our comprehensive practice. The ethical values recommended for a system of knowing might best be called epistemic virtues. All traditions of inquiry and action share stories to perpetuate and regenerate their cultural system. There's a YouTube video from the September 2020 event on the fundamental role of story in our lives. All storytelling is fictive. It is a construction or invention imagined to communicate ideas and values. Storytelling is the imaginative repackaging of experience in support of some tradition, your own or someone that you're glomming onto. Experience may in fact be the unit of communication for our stories. To further develop a process of imagining the epistemic virtues needed to properly learn from experience, we have explored the moral qualities that George Polya and Buckminster Fuller included in their accounts of learning from experience. The proper epistemic virtues for comprehensive practice may vary from time to time, place to place, or even at different moments in one's life history. To foster the kind of dynamic thinking needed to considerately develop your own ethical guidance, we leave it to each explorer to choose values to guide their own comprehensivity, their own inclination for comprehensive exploration. Choose well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, CJ. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to take a minute here to preview the questions next time, because most probably CJ is not going to make it. CJ, if you want to look back on the entire year and see what questions you would like to put on the table, what would you put on the table? What questions about comprehensivism would you put on the table?
Question about comprehensivism. Well, I'd like to invite others to get started. So
okay, folks, go ahead. Go ahead.
How do you want to develop your skill at comprehensive exploration?
Wonderful. How do you plan to develop your skill? So that's one kind of looking forward. I would also like to ask everybody the question looking backwards of saying, you've been coming to these Comprehensivist Wednesdays for a long time. You've read a lot of things on comprehensivism. What progress have you made? How do you think you're different as a result of that? So that's another question I would like to put on the table. Anybody else wants to put questions on the table? This is like, we'll like next Wednesday, we are going to have, people put questions on the table, but let's put some questions on the table so we can, kind of think about it. I think plan is a great thing. Looking back is another one. Anybody else wants to put any questions on the table about comprehensivism? What big questions would you like to ask about comprehensivism at this level? Kevin, what question would you put?
Why comprehensive is so important for us?
Wonderful. Why is it important? Is it important? Okay. Vanessa, what question would you put at the table, on the table?
How you might pitch it to someone or someone that might be wavering.
Okay.
Maybe how would you validate and justify it?
Okay. How would you promote comprehensivism to others?
And especially those who are then doubting it, maybe they believe
Got
it.
Got it. What about Zheng? Zheng, what would you put on the table?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to try to comprehend. My question is, when you try to comprehend something, you have to have a boundary somehow.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much vast of knowledges and everything else, and it just, how do we draw the boundary?
Wonderful. Excellent question. How do you define, how do you set limits for your comprehensivist explorations? Wonderful. All right. Mike, go ahead.
Does one need some level of depth or incisiveness to complement their comprehensivist view?
Okay, depth or incisiveness. Ambika, what question would you put on the table?
How can this group create something, do something creative as a group thing that would suggest the influences from the different voices, and how would that fit into this comprehensivist association?
Thank you. Next up is CJ.
In the Dante event last month, I proposed 10 epistemic virtues for comprehensive exploration. I am in the process of extracting the theoretical part from that video to make a derivative video that just covers those 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, are those the epistemic virtues for comprehensive exploration? How should they be revised? Do they make sense?
Sure. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask, let's do crowdsourcing of the virtues. I'm going to ask the question, based on everything you've learned about comprehensivism, what do you think are the epistemic virtues of comprehensivism? Let everybody come up with their own answers. I think that will produce even more, even more kind of richer thing, because people will come at it from very different angles. So
yeah, that's a better way to seek out new ideas. But I'm going to produce the video because I think in that Dante, I was careful to separate the Dante examples from the
I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea. Yeah.
And,
thank you.
And that's something I'd like feedback on.
Sure. I'll give you feedback. We'll give you feedback, but we'll do that in a structured way. Maybe we'll do like one section just for that. Okay, we'll do one section just for that.
I'll send you the video when it's put out.
Yeah, I'll incorporate it into the meetup lineup. Don't worry. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Jenny. Joe, what's your question?
I would challenge everybody to come up with something that we haven't covered here at 52 Living Ideas.
Okay, I love that. What have we not covered?
What are we missing?
What have we not covered? Wonderful.
There's a lot.
Well, let's hear it, and then we can prioritize. Yeah.
Yes. Next up is going to be Jenny, followed by Alexander. Jenny, what question would you put on the table?
How to develop a non-grasping approach to comprehensivism so that it is loosely held, that it's useful, but not so fixed.
Okay, wonderful.
A non-grasping approach.
Wonderful, non-grasping approach. Very good. Alexander, what question would you put on the table about comprehensivism?
What are the foundations for comprehensive virtues?
Okay, very good. What are the foundations? Excellent. So folks, I'm just going to rattle off all the questions just to jog your memories so you can come up with even better questions than these, okay? These are not the real questions. These are only imposters, okay? We are going to come up with, you're going to take them all in. These are all, what is the right term for actors? These are all the extras, okay, performing. So we have to get started. First draft, yes. First drafts, okay. So, but it's an incredible first draft, okay? These extras are, and that's what happens in New York. You see actors just on off Broadway, and they're amazing. So this is what it is. How do you plan to develop your comprehensivism looking forward? Looking backwards, what have you learned about comprehensivism after all our meetups on comprehensivism? Why is it important to be a comprehensivist? How do you promote comprehensivism, especially to people who are skeptical about it? How do you define limits of your individual comprehensivist explorations? What is the role of depth and incisiveness in developing comprehensivism? What are the epistemic virtues underlying comprehensivism? What have we not covered in our quest for comprehensivism? How do you develop a non-grasping approach to comprehensivism? And what are the foundations of comprehensivism? So you have to beat all these questions, okay, when we start out. All right, and if you really like the questions, you can vote, you can be the champion of that question, okay, for next time. So really looking forward to it. Again, thank you so much, everybody. This is always so, just great to have so many great minds here. And CJ, what a year, but we're going to have a better year next year.
Indeed. We'll cover some of those things we haven't gotten to yet.
Sounds good. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Night.